Greetings, everyone. A spectacular and terrifying seven-move maneuver has just taken place on the geopolitical chessboard of Eastern Europe, completely shattering alliances that once seemed unbreakable. Without firing a single bullet, without deploying a single soldier to the battlefield, the Ukrainian General Staff has completely dismantled Vladimir Putin's Northern Front equation, forcing his most steadfast ally, Belarus, to surrender right at the negotiating table. And here are the main points. Ukraine forced Putin's closest ally to surrender right at the negotiating table. Kyiv has turned the entire territory of Belarus into an open book and completely wiped out Russia's northern front. What terrifying secret lies in the kill list of Baidan, Ron Pomengao, that made a head of state panic, doubt the Kremlin's victory, and accept a shameful retreat? The 1,500-kilometer deadly front line and the collapse of the outdated steel bloc in Eastern Europe. When the T-72B tanks suddenly became moving graves in front of Zavoli, and 5,000 elite expeditionary troops from the Katarsk-Kalinutsky regiment approached the border, the Minsk elite understood that they were facing the risk of total collapse from within. Will the conscript army of Belarus accept being cannon fodder for Russia, or will they trigger a brutal coup as soon as the nation's energy lifelines are strangled? The silent betrayal. Lukashenko openly stabbed Putin in the back, pushing the Kremlin into a state of desperate isolation. A classic geopolitical maneuver is unfolding. Is it the raw survival instinct of a dictator facing the ruins of 38 Russian oil refineries? Or is it the invisible hand of Beijing, worth billions of dollars, that orchestrated this historic escape? Welcome to the analysis program of Luanban Shinsu. Ukraine has dealt Lukashenko a brutal blow, isolating Russia. Before we get into the content, please take a few seconds to like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue. Thank you, dear audience. Ladies and gentlemen, on the geopolitical chessboard of Eastern Europe, a new and dramatic chapter has just been written, revealing a harsh intelligence reality that has turned the entire territory of Belarus into an open book. At the end of May 2026, Colonel Maxar Brody, the head of Ukraine's drone forces, sent a warning message, a strong strategic signal to the Minsk government. 500 key targets from top-secret military bases, storage facilities, fuel depots, strategic points, to the vital industrial arteries that sustain the life of this nation have all fallen within Ukraine's destructive reach. With its unique geographical structure, where the farthest point of Belarus is only 350 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, this country is completely powerless against the 3,000-kilometer range of the Farmingo unmanned aerial systems. That vulnerability becomes even more profound when looking at the lesson right before our eyes from Russia, where billion-dollar super refineries and financial centers are continuously neutralized by asymmetric strikes. The military elite in Minsk have had to bitterly admit that their current security structure has completely collapsed in the face of a neighboring country capable of isolating and suffocating them logistically. Technological helplessness has forced the Belarusian military into tragedy as traditional weaponry fails against modern warfare tactics. Minsk's air defense, which relied on outdated S-300 missile systems designed only to intercept high-altitude targets, has now become completely useless against swarms of low-flying drones. Although Belarus has weapons that can carry nuclear warheads, it is actually defenseless in its own airspace. On the ground, the situation for the armored forces is no better, as the T-72B tanks, once the backbone of the army, have suddenly become moving steel coffins in the face of the power of Javelin top-attack missiles and FPV drones carrying smart explosives. In the air, the outdated Su-25 and MiG-29 squadrons are unable to meet fourth-generation combat standards, facing the risk of being shot down as soon as they take off by advanced air defense systems. To achieve this absolute and destructive transparency, the Ukrainian General Staff has operated a highly sophisticated, multi-layered intelligence apparatus, seamlessly combining technical reconnaissance and human networks, far surpassing ordinary observation activities. From space, NATO's early warning platforms continuously scan the borders, combined with high-resolution satellite systems to constantly transmit the heat signatures of every camp, radar station, logistics center, and Kyiv's data warehouses. Deep within enemy lines, urban intelligence agents and the AT's guerrilla network, operating effectively inside Russia, have provided precise physical confirmations at railway hubs and industrial facilities in Belarus. From that massive stream of information, Ukrainian analysis units have processed hundreds of thousands of data points each month to create a perfect target map, ready to neutralize every vital function of the neighboring country. That harsh reality sparked a rational nightmare, directly breaking the will to resist of President Alexander Lukashenko when a front line extended by another 1,500 kilometers was weighed in mathematical terms. That massive border is mostly plains and forests, completely lacking natural barriers, creating a security gap that cannot be filled for a force with only 45,000 regular troops. Having to both stretch thin to hold a long front line and protect the strategic depth behind is an impossible task for the Belarusian army. In the shocking interview on June 15, the Belarusian leader had to admit his strategic helplessness with the front line extended by another 1,500 kilometers. Neither we nor the Russians can guarantee this. Seeing the abyss of an asymmetric war, this head of state chose a terrifying but clear-headed way out, officially apologizing to Ukraine and announcing a withdrawal. He affirmed that a Russian military victory was unrealistic and openly questioned the Kremlin's vision for the war. This was not simply a diplomatic awakening, but a silent diplomatic betrayal, throwing the alliance into panic and causing deep internal divisions. Without firing a single shot or deploying a single soldier to the battlefield, the Ukrainian General Staff completely dismantled Vladimir Putin's Northern Front equation, forcing the opponent to surrender at the negotiating table with a decisive blow. The indictment was made public. The truth was exposed when the world witnessed a head of state appear on television with a bitter admission of the deep wounds suffered by his country. This isn't just a diplomatic move to avoid conflict, but a panicked confession as the entire structure nears collapse and logistical strangulation approaches. Alexander Lukashenko's vision was completely shut down by the harsh reality from his Russian ally, a giant entity that is proving powerless against asymmetric attacks right in its own homeland. Satellite data from NACA's Thesis system has provided undeniable evidence. Ukraine's long-range operations have crippled the production capacity of 38 strategic oil refineries deep inside Russian territory. The disruption of the supply chain immediately triggered a severe fuel logistics crisis in about 55 Russian territories, spreading all the way to the Moscow lifeline and reaching as far as St. Petersburg. Local gas stations have run dry, diesel supplies for agriculture have been squeezed, and chaos in the commercial transport network is clear evidence that even an energy superpower can be brought to its knees by the consequences of cross-border warfare. If the Kremlin, with its vast geography and endless resources, can try to spread out risks over time or activate alternative railway routes, Belarus has none of that flexibility. The energy lifeline, the backbone of Belarus's centralized economy and industry, depends solely on a single critical point: the Malaysia oil refinery. When Colonel Maxar Brody's intelligence unit put this facility at the center of their list of 500 targets, the military leadership in Minsk understood that just one precise strike on Malaysia would not only cause a conventional fuel shortage, but would completely paralyze the vital functions of the state apparatus. However, the most invisible yet brutal pressure that pushed Minsk to decide to leave the battlefield came from an internal specter named the Katus Kalinowski Regiment. Belarusian citizens who were once exiled after intense political upheavals have forged themselves into a regular, elite, and highly experienced armed force within the ranks of the Ukrainian armed forces. With a force of up to about 5,000 volunteer fighters, this unit has gone through the fiercest battlefields, from the campaign to defend Kiev to the bloody trenches in northern Bakhmut. This is no longer just an ordinary border defense brigade, but an organization with unwavering political ideals whose ultimate goal is to change the regime in their homeland. With elite special forces units like the Voller Battalion, this entity creates demographic and political pressure even more terrifying than barrages of cruise missiles. If the Minsk government rashly deploys 45,000 soldiers who are troops lacking real combat experience to a 1,500-kilometer-long front line, they will have to face people who are their brothers, sharing the same language. But they possess a modern asymmetric warfare mindset. The weakness in the command system or the risk of an internal military coup due to logistical exhaustion is the regime's fatal weakness. With a calculated move, the leader in Minsk is trying to prevent not only long-range weapon systems from the outside, but more importantly, to safeguard sensitive political and military vulnerabilities within the country itself. From a global perspective, the invisible hand of Beijing has added tremendous weight to this decision to retreat. Belarus has long been an irreplaceable link, a vital relay station worth billions of dollars in China's Belt and Road Initiative heading into Europe. All major railway lines and trade routes carrying Chinese goods to Western markets must pass through this region. The mission to maintain the global supply chain does not allow Belarus to turn into a devastated battlefield, where international insurance premiums skyrocket and logistics flows are choked. The silent but powerful geo-economic pressure from Beijing on both Minsk and Moscow is the ultimate catalyst that forces Belarus to adopt a neutral stance and send an apology to Kiev. This strategic rift directly strips Moscow of its influence over its only regional ally, pushing the Kremlin into an unprecedented state of diplomatic isolation. When its closest partners recognize the strategic reality and leave the table, all of Moscow's military doctrines officially lose their legitimacy. Alexander Lukashenko's cold statement on television that he does not believe in a realistic military victory for either Russia or Ukraine dealt a fatal blow to the myth of absolute dominance that Moscow had painstakingly built. The shift in Minsk's rhetoric is actually a reflection of the deep fractures within Russia's internal political circles. Even the ideologue Zakhar Polypan had to bitterly admit that the current military structure cannot bring about a lasting victory, while a pro-Kremlin military analyst, Igor Kurov-Khrushchenko, continuously issued warnings about a difficult period ahead due to the breakdown of the logistics supply chain. From the parliament, State Duma deputy Vyacheslav Makayev also sounded the alarm about the economic burden, pushing the risk of social unrest to a warning level. When both the inner and outer circles of Vladimir Putin's administration saw the exhaustion on the ground, Alexander Lukashenko's move served as international confirmation of these doubts. In this comprehensive move, by making a strong statement that no campaign targeting Ukraine would be allowed to start from its territory, Belarus has completely eliminated the strategic card known as the Northern Front that Russia had kept in reserve. On the outside, the leader of Minsk still wears the cloak of loyalty to Putin, but behind the scenes he has skillfully created a remarkable diplomatic way out by sending an apology to Volodymyr Zelensky. Lukashenko even borrowed the words from a conversation with Putin to turn his desire for neutrality into a joint decision for both of them, arguing that both leaders understood that being dragged into the war was unacceptable. The actual isolation from this strategic partner, combined with domestic administrative and economic turmoil, has pushed Russia's ability to project regional power into a complete freeze. Belarus has now revealed itself as a solitary entity, tightly bound by a web of threats, both military and intelligence-related, coming from all four directions. To the west, Poland is building a solid eastern shield, aiming to create a massive army of 500,000 troops coordinated with state-of-the-art F-35 stealth fighter squadrons, completely overturning the regional balance of power. Lithuania is reinforcing its border with Belarus with strong fortifications and a modern sensor network. Meanwhile, for the first time in modern history, Germany has deployed a full armored brigade outside its territory, blocking troop movements from Minsk. At the same time, large-scale NATO exercises involving 30,000 troops from all three branches, Navy, Army, and Air Force, have completely squeezed and restricted Belarus's maneuvering space. The Suwalki Corridor Doctrine, which was theoretically the bridge for Russia to maintain a land supply line to the Kaliningrad exclave, has now been completely abolished after Minsk's calculated move towards neutrality. Belarus withdrawing from the direct conflict equation allows NATO to strengthen its security architecture in the Baltic Sea and Eastern Europe with unprecedented ease, which means Lukashenko is playing the loyalist in front of Putin, but is actually making a desperate escape out the back door. A pragmatic defection, a silent act of treachery that the Kremlin sees through, but is powerless to intervene. At a moment when geopolitical interests and the question of personal survival intersect, the chief architect of Minsk has performed a flawless diplomatic balancing act. The dictator's calculation is brutally straightforward. If Russia somehow wins, Belarus will continue to exist as a satellite state in its current orbit. But if Russia loses, his seat of power will be severely shaken. At that point, the elite Kalinowski regiment will pour across the border, economic pressure will strangle the country, and the flames of civil unrest will ignite. If Belarus foolishly gets involved in the war, Ukraine will immediately open fire on all 500 critical targets, the home front will collapse, and the Polish-NATO alliance, with its massive steel force in the west, will immediately pour in. The only optimal solution for survival is to refuse to participate in the war to all sides, while still pretending to be a loyal ally to the Kremlin. However, as asymmetric pressure increases, The illusion of this neutrality is losing its value in Moscow's eyes day by day. The stern warning about 500 targets from the General Staff of Colonel Maxar Brody, along with the pincer movement from the 1,500-kilometer front line, is like a net cast outside the fence, shattering an ally's illusions. The Minsk government, which had served as a logistical base for Russia's campaigns over the past 4 years, quickly woke up from its illusions and distanced itself from military fantasies when it saw the fires, the tracks of tanks, and fuel sweeping across the devastated Russian territories, along with the ruins of oil refineries on the other side of the border. While the Ukrainian army completely turned the tide on the northern front without firing a single bullet, Vladimir Putin was pushed into a state of isolation and deep strategic uncertainty, where even his most trusted friends have lost faith in Russia's military strength. So what is your opinion on how Lukashenko betrayed Russia?